broken the law before I'd even started my test. I then proceed to make 3 huge mistakes before my test has even started. Hello, welcome back. Today, I wanted to share with you a story that is kind of funny and kind of horrendous and is just an absolute complete fail. I thought it might be an interesting learning perspective. Maybe it can help some people not make these mistakes that I made, or maybe it will just be an interesting story to listen to whilst you're doing something else around the house. This is a story about my first ever driving test, which I took a few weeks ago, and it went so horrendously wrong that it kind of just makes me laugh now, but at the time I was in tears all day. I had my first ever test booked for April 2020, which was kind of just around the start of where the world just went to shite. I had already been on and off with driving. I'd already had quite a few bad driving instructor experiences where it had just delayed me in getting my test. So this April 2020 test was already long overdue. I should have really taken my test years before. All my friends started driving when they were 17. I'm 25. So this was a big deal. Everything was riding on this date. I'd been taking my lessons. I'd finally found a good instructor and I was ready. I'd got myself my own car. Anyway, test is cancelled. So it's then rebooked for August. So that's another 5 months, but I don't really mind because, the world's gone into lockdown. So let's just do this together. Anyway, so August rolls around and it's cancelled again. It's now moved to December. So that's another 4.5 months, which is kind of a bit annoying. So this is now taking a lot longer than I thought it would, but we're all in this together, right? We're all in this together. Everyone's tests have been cancelled. It's fine. It comes to the day before my test. I've got my mum to stay at my flat with me because my test centre is in the town that I live, but I live here alone and I can't get to the test centre in my car unless there's someone in the passenger seat with me. So she stays around at my house, and then that morning I check my emails and my test had been cancelled the night before, which was less than 24 hours notice. So that was a piss take. My mum had literally travelled all this way to come stay with me, and my test is cancelled again for the 3rd time, and it is now moved to March. Yeah. Fuck. I've now had my car for almost a year by March, so I've had a lot of experience in my car. I'm feeling ready. Test is cancelled again and moved to August 2021. I eventually get to August. I have waited a total of 16 months plus all the previous years where I was delayed beforehand. So a lot was riding on this test. I was ready. I've been driving around in my car for over a year now. I know how to drive. I'm very comfortable in my car. I'm comfortable driving. I know I'm gonna pass. I just know it. I know I'm gonna pass. How could I not? My test date rolls around and I make sure that everything's ready, that nothing's going to go wrong. My car's been a bit temperamental throughout the year, so I was a little bit nervous that something would go wrong with my car. I've done all the regulations, that I've bought an extra mirror, because if you're taking a test in your own car, there's a lot more rules and regulations. You have to make sure there's no warning lights. I took it for an MOT, got a new MOT, took it to be serviced, blah-de-blah-de-blah. I don't know if I'll add this in, but anyway, so my back windscreen wiper doesn't work, and I start panicking because I'm thinking, oh my God, they're not going to let me take my test because my back windscreen wiper is not going to work. And if it rains on my test, what if they don't let me take my test? Lo and behold, I check the weather, it's going to rain on my test. So the day before, I have to get my grandma to come round to help me drive my car to a garage to get it fixed, where they do not have the part. We took it to a couple different garages. I called every garage in the town. Nobody could help me with that short notice. So anyway, I just decided to wing it and just not mention the back windscreen wiper. And luckily, it didn't end up being a problem. One of the garage people told me that if your back windscreen wiper doesn't work, it actually is not a legal requirement for your car for your test, because a lot of cars don't even have back windscreen wipers. So I don't know why I was so worried about it, but I just had this feeling that they weren't gonna let me take my test. Anyway, so now we've got to the actual test day. My test, sadly, is at 8:10 in the morning. And again, I live alone. There's no one to take me to the test center. So my grandma has to drive like 20 minutes very early in the morning to come and meet me at my place. We're on time. We're good. I've woken up. I've put on a nice outfit. I'm ready to smash it. Made sure my car has enough wiper fluid and enough oil. And I've like cleared all the junk out of my car. I've got the extra inside mirror. I've got all these anti-bac wipes so that I can wipe everything down. I'm ready. It's a bit of a drizzly day, it's grey, it's early in the morning and it's raining. We've got plenty of time, by the way. We set off and I noticed that my wheel is really heavy and I'm struggling to like turn it and get round corners. Like it's a real like I have to really like lug it round and I'm like, this is not right. There is something wrong with my steering. And then I remember back to my show me tell me questions, which I've revised like the full week coming up to my test, and I remember something about when you start the car pulling the wheel a bit to like help with the anti-lock steering or something. So I think, oh, maybe that has something to do with it. So I'm in my head, I'm thinking, okay, when I get there, when I turn on the car, I'm gonna like pull the thing a bit so that maybe it will like loosen it up. Anyway, so I'm driving there and I'm telling grandma, I'm like, grandma, the steering feels really wrong. I think there's something wrong with my car. And my grandma's like, don't worry, darling, like calm down, it'll be all right. Anyway, we get to test center. It's not very far, so my car hasn't had much time to warm up. It was literally like a 2-minute journey. I need to park up in the bay. So I park terribly, which I never do. I always park perfectly, but because of just this pressure and like this a funny steering wheel situation, I park terribly. I'm like well over the line, well over the bay. I'm like, I could not have my examiner come out and see me so poorly parked. Like I want to make a good impression, so I start trying to like correct myself. All the while my grandma's like, oh, don't worry, you're parked, like just leave it. And I'm like, no grandma, I need to park correctly, otherwise he's gonna think I can't drive. So I'm like lugging this steering wheel around and I'm like trying to get it in and I'm like literally panicking. As I'm trying to park, I'm already starting to panic and I'm already getting flustered. I can tell the time is running out. I've got like 10 minutes till my test, but I'm still thinking like, I need to park perfectly. So anyway, eventually I get in the space, but I'm a little bit flustered. Grandma's like trying to calm me down. Then the examiner comes out to greet us. I'm already flustered. Something's already gone wrong, but I then proceed to make 3 huge mistakes before my test has even started. And he says, oh, your L plate is actually in the wrong position. I had my back L plate in the inside window when it's meant to be on the outside of the car. And he was like, yeah, that can like, it obstructs your view, which it didn't really, because I couldn't see because of the headrest was there anyway. But anyway, it had been like that for a year. I'd seen other cars with their L plates in the inside. Anyway, apparently that's completely wrong. It needs to be on the outside of your car. And because I didn't have like magnetic ones, because I was so afraid of them falling off the car, I had just literally, it was like a piece of plastic and there was nothing to secure it onto the back of the car with. There was literally nothing I could secure it onto with. All the while, I've got like 7 minutes left until my test starts. It's raining. I know that I still have to anti-back the passenger seat and I know that I still have to warm up the car to sort out the steering wheel. So 7 minutes left. I'm starting to panic. So he's like, don't worry, I'll go in and get some sellotape and we'll just sellotape it onto the back of the car. So he comes back, he's got like a roll of sellotape. It's broken, so he takes it out of the roll and gives it to me. I've got these really big, long acrylic nails on and I'm like trying to find the end of the sellotape. You know the challenge when you just cannot find the end of it. So I finally managed to get a piece of sellotape off and I tried to stick it on, but of course it's raining. So like I'm putting it on the car and it's just not sticking at all. It's just sliding right off. So I'm starting to panic, my hands are starting to shake, and all the while I'm still trying to get this sellotape off this roll, but I cannot for the life of me find the end. Every time I take a piece off, I just lose the end again, and I'm just not thinking straight. So my grandma's there, she gets a cloth out of her bag, she's trying to like dry the car like constantly as it's raining, as I'm putting the sellotape on. The test guy is to my right, and he's like trying to help me with the sellotape, and then I start like, because there's no way to like cut it, so I start using my teeth and putting it on, and he's like, you can't do that because of COVID, like it's not the best thing to do. So I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. My hands were literally shaking trying to find the end of this sellotape, and I feel like the test guy could tell that I was like panicking, and he was really good, to be honest. He was really trying to like calm me down and just being very like casual and calm about it. Anyway, we eventually get it stuck on, and he's like, okay, you're gonna need to repark your car so that it's facing outwards. So I'm like, oh, for Christ. crying out loud. Like, I've just like spent all that time trying to park it perfectly, and now I've got to turn it around and repark anyway. So I get back in with Grandma and we turn the car around. Grandma goes inside to wait, and he goes in to get like the papers, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got this moment alone in the car. I need to calm myself down. I also need to figure out how I'm going to fix this steering wheel. I've only got a couple of minutes until he comes back. So I'm thinking, all right, I'll do what I always do. I'll just warm up the car. So I turn the ignition on and sit in the car. I always do this, like, just to warm up the car before setting off. And I also thought, oh, maybe it will warm up the steering wheel so that I can like actually use the steering wheel properly. So I turn on the ignition and sit there on my own, you know, with the handbrake on and everything, and I start doing my like slow breathing. I'm like, okay, Isabella, you need to get a hold of yourself and calm yourself down, because I actually felt like crying. Like, I felt like tear, you know, when you feel like your tears are gonna come. You need to get a hold of yourself. Like, you are better than this. You know how to control your mind. You know you've been waiting so long for this test, and you are not going to mess it up. And I really have a pep talk for myself, and I'm like, pull yourself together. I do my slow breathing. I managed to pull myself together a bit just in time for the examiner to come back with his papers. So I open the door and he tells me, right, you're not actually supposed to be sitting in there with the ignition on. That's actually illegal. Right? So I'm like, shit. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I turn the ignition off. I'm like, of course, like, I'm so sorry. Like, obviously I'm not supposed to do that as a learner driver, like on a learner license. So he's like, yeah, so you're not supposed to ever sit in the car with the ignition on without a full license. And I was like, he was like, that's illegal. So I'd already like broken the law before I'd even started my test. I tell him, I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry. I was just trying to like warm up the car. You know, it's a bit of a rainy day. Anyway, so he kind of lets me off the hook. He just seems to like forget about it, which I was like, thank Christ. I guess he knew that a lot of people have been waiting a long time for their tests. So he was going to try and help people out, you know. I put on my brave face. I'm like, yeah, you know, he gives me the papers. I'm like ticking things off, like signing things like, yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, you know, just putting on my happy voice, trying to hide that I'm actually about to cry inside. Oh yes, and also I had like quickly wiped down all the, you know, the passenger seat again. I'd done it before we set off, but then I just did it again because my grandma had been sat there. Like, the whole seat and all the touch surfaces and the handles and everything that he might touch, I'd wiped down with anti-bac whilst I had that moment alone. So then he gets in the car and he's like, right, okay, so this car is not actually COVID safe. And I'm like, oh no, I've just cleaned it. Like, I've anti-backed all of the surfaces, just like it says in the information about using your own car, that you need to like make sure all of the surfaces are wiped down, which I had done. And he was like, no, like, you see all these crumbs on the floor and stuff, like, you need to have spent like a good hour cleaning your car inside, which I can see you haven't done. And I was like, oh no, I'd literally tried my best that I could do in the time that I had, which seems silly because I had loads of time, but I didn't think that I needed to literally hoover the entire car and like make it spotless. And it wasn't a dirty car. Like, I don't keep a lot of crap in my car. My car is pretty clean and tidy. Like, there was a few crumbs on the floor because obviously I don't keep like a handheld vacuum with me everywhere I go. So it's very rarely that I'm actually able to like get the opportunity to hoover the inside of my car. And you know, there was a few crumbs in like the little cup holder and stuff, but it wasn't dirty. And so he was like, yes, all these crumbs around here, you're not supposed to have that. Like, it's supposed to be completely spotless. And I was like, oh no. But he was like, don't worry, I've seen worse. Like, we're coming to the end of this cleaning regulations thing, so don't worry about it. And he had gloves on anyway and a mask. Obviously we were wearing masks, so it seemed like he was gonna let me off the hook for that as well. I was like, thank you. Then he explains how the test's gonna go, blah blah blah. Like, I couldn't really remember what he was saying because I was just so trembling inside. I've had such a bad start to this test that I've flustered myself. I've already been close to tears. I've already been shaking. I've already been stressed and flustered before this test has even started. It's bound to go wrong, even though I'm very confident. So anyway, we set off. the steering wheel is still really heavy. So I get out of the driving test centre, and I took my test in Tunbridge Wells, which is apparently one of the hardest places to take your test, which I didn't know. I thought I was familiar with the roads, but he took me somewhere completely where I wasn't actually familiar with, which was fine. I've been driving long enough that I'm able to deal with roads that I don't know. And I start driving and the steering wheel is heavy, and I'm like lugging it round, but I'm trying to make it look like I'm not struggling with it, because I don't want him to cancel the test if there's something wrong with my car, because in the regulations it says if there's anything wrong with your car, your test will be like terminated. I'm struggling with it, but I'm trying to make it look like it's smooth because I don't want him to see that it's obviously really stiff. Anyway, the steering wheel started to loosen up after a while, so thank goodness. It was all good. And about halfway through the test, I make my first serious mistake. I don't even want to go back there and talk about it. But anyway, and it was like the easiest maneuver. Obviously, during your test, at some point your examiner asks you to pull up somewhere on the left. And I knew that this was coming because my driving instructor always does it, and my boyfriend who's been teaching me always says like they're going to tell you to pull up somewhere on the left. And I know that when they say pull up somewhere on the left or pull up somewhere on the left when it's safe, that you are meant to continue driving until you find somewhere safe to pull up. I know that if you take a wrong turning or take a wrong exit on the roundabout, as long as you did it correctly and safely, they can't mark it as a mistake because you did it safely. So I know that even if they ask you to do something, it's okay if you don't do it as long as you do what you're doing safely. So it comes up to this question, but the way he phrased it completely knocked me off guard. We're driving down kind of like a cul-de-sac, and he's like, okay, I want you to pull up by this lamppost. It was probably about 3 or 4 car lengths in front of me, and so we were coming up to it. I was expecting him to say, pull up on the left where it's safe, or when you're ready, pull up on the left, which is what they always say in my lessons. But he said, pull up by this lamppost, which was coming up like quite shortly. I like panic a little bit because I'm thinking, oh, do I go on or do I stop? And so at the last minute, I think, I'll do what he says. Just start going left. I don't even bloody indicate. And of course, so I end up pulled up by the lamppost. And of course, there's a little white Mini behind me, which means that I instantly knew I'd failed. Because if you cause another car to slow down, or if you put another car in danger, that is a serious fault. And because I had not indicated and there was a car behind me, that was a fail. That was a serious fault. I may have got away with it if there was no car behind me. And this white Mini behind me was like, it seemed like they were kind of like pressurizing me. Obviously I'd slowed down and stuff, but they were like getting right up my arse. And I just thought, if you knew how long it had taken me to get this test, if you knew that I was doing my test, maybe you would have been a bit more patient with me. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I could have been reading into it. Maybe they were just driving normally and I was doing everything wrong, which probably is the case. As soon as I'd like pulled up and I noticed there was the Mini behind me that was like, what are you doing? I was like, fuck, I fucked it up. And I can tell by the way the examiner's like acting that he knows that I've fucked it up as well. And he's like, okay, all right. So now we're going to do a parallel park. We proceed to do a parallel park, which I've done 1,000 times. I have a little red Mini with Union Jack on the top. I love it. I've parallel parked my Mini like hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm pretty much a wizard at it now. And Minis are super easy to park because they're quite short. Because I'm a bit flustered and disappointed because I kind of knew that I just failed, it takes me like quite a few maneuvers to get it right because I'm trying to think of the angles, but I'm also thinking of the fact that I just failed. So yeah, I bugger that up as well. I do manage to get in the space. It could have been a lot smoother. Now this threw me off a little bit as well because he did continue the test even though I'd made a serious fault. So I was under the understanding that sometimes once you've failed that they will just stop the test there. But the test carried on, which made me think, is there like a little sliver of hope? Like, is there a little tiny sliver of hope? I know that once you've made a mistake, all you can do is let it go and drive as safely as possible. So I'm driving pretty well. But then we're going down a 30 road, which really looked like a 40. He tells me to slow down. He's like, slow down, slow down. He's told me I was going 37. I'm pretty sure I was going about 34. I can't say that he was wrong though. Like on a Mini, also it's weird, like I've got a separate speedometer in front of me and there's another speedometer which is like the little pin, which is harder to see the exact number, but on my speedometer in front of me it's a digital number, so I can see exactly my number that I was going. But anyway, he said, yeah, you were just going 37, and I was like, the speed limit was a 30, so either way, I was going over the speed limit. That was counted as a serious driving fault as well. So that was my second serious driving fault, which I would have failed on regardless of whether I made the mistake previously. If anything, I piss people off because I always stay at the speed limit and people always zoom around me when I'm going at the correct speed. Anyway, it was my mistake. It wasn't like a built up area. It wasn't an area where there was lots of like things around. It was like a pretty like straight road. Cars seemed to be going pretty fast around me, so I thought I'd speed up. And yeah, it wasn't. So always just pay extra attention. And then I made another mistake at a roundabout. I tend to do roundabouts kind of quickly because when I'm on them, I just want to get off them as soon as possible. And I know this is like kind of a bad habit. So I entered a roundabout too fast or something, or I don't know, I didn't leave a wide enough gap. I don't know. Anyway, that's a mistake that so many people make on a daily basis, even people that have been driving for ages. So I believe that was also a serious driving fault. So anyway, we continue the test for another like half hour after I made my first mistake, and we eventually get back to the driving test center, and I know I failed, but for some reason I've got this weird like sliver of hope. He tells me, well, I'm sorry young lady, but I'm afraid it is a fail. And I kind of just put my head in my hands and I just started crying. And I know that's quite bad. I really am not the type of person that would get upset over something like that. But it was 100% just all the frustration of how long it had taken me, and the fact that I had literally told everyone, all my friends, all my family, I told them all that I was going to pass because I knew I was so confident. Failing was just not an option for me, not after 16 months and 4 cancellations and however many years of shitty driving instructors that I'd had. I was just in disbelief, so I just started crying. I was like, I could not believe I'd buggered it up. I was crying and crying, and he was like going through the pointers of where I messed up, and obviously it was 3 majors. What? Yeah, and like a couple of minors, but he didn't bother going into those because I guess he just it seemed like he wanted to get out of the car as quickly as possible because it seemed like he just didn't like the fact that I was crying. He leaves and I'm left in the car just sobbing, and I need to scream. I really need to scream, like I'm sobbing and something just needs to come out. So I do up my windows and I just let out a scream. I'm just so frustrated, so angry with myself, so angry with everything that had gone wrong that morning. Obviously I waited for him to get out the car. I'm not like gonna scream at him while he's there, but there was like someone was taking their like bike test like a couple of car lengths away from me. They had like the helmets on, and they were just standing around the bike, but there was 2 men there, and I'm pretty sure they like obviously heard me scream and sob and cry, and I felt a bit bad because I was like, oh, I don't want to like put a downer on someone else's test, but I was just so upset that I had to let it out. Anyway, I get out the car, my grandma's coming towards me. She says, oh, he told me, and she comes and gives me like the longest, loveliest hug. And do you know what? That hug just meant so much to me from my grandma. Like I love my grandma, and she just gave me the loveliest hug, and she really was really lovely and supportive and made me feel better and was really gentle with me and was telling me it was going to be all right, and literally was sobbing the whole way back. I couldn't stop crying. Anyway, my grandma had to go and I just went into my flat on my own and I just cried for like a good hour or 2. I called my mum, I called my dad. My mum then told my brother, so he called me. I had good long conversations with all like my closest family members, and it did make me feel a bit better. And then I went on to book my next test, and there's like nothing available because there's such a huge backlog of people that have like been trying to take tests, and also the pressure having to wait so long was causing a lot of people to fail, myself included. So then obviously that creates even more of a backlog. It isn't even possible to get like driving lessons. Like I tried to book a few lessons before my test just to like get myself up to speed. Impossible. Like contacted every driving instructor in my area, all of them fully booked for like the next couple of months. I looked on every driving test centre in England, and all of them had no availability. So that meant that every single test centre in England was fully booked for the next 6 months, which would bring my total wait time up to 22 months since my first test was cancelled. So I was just not willing to do that. Anyway, so I managed to book one in January for Portsmouth, which I have no intention of going to. I've just booked it and I'm hoping to find like someone's cancellation. There's like loads of apps where you put in your details and it like tries to find you cancelled tests. If you just literally type into Google, find cancelled driving test app or a website, you will find some website. They all do the same thing. Whenever people cancel or change their test, it will like notify you, and then if you're quick enough, you then book that cancellation and then you don't have to wait. I'll stop rambling now. So that was my horrific driving test day. It took me a little while to get over it, but you know what? It's okay. Wow, hi sunshine. But yeah, things could really be worse, so I'm not gonna complain any longer. I guess I could always tell my other story. Yeah, I had a really bad experience with an intensive driving course instructor. So let me know if you want to hear that story. If you want to follow me elsewhere, you know I got the Instagram, and I don't actually use much other social media at the moment, so Instagram's the place for me. You can follow me, it's Isabella DeMarco. I also have a website where you can just see a little bit more about me and my passions, things about me down below. And thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye bye. I just like pretending that I'm on the show. I'm guilty. I love the show. I'm only watching this one last season though, never again.